Welcome to the Anything Goes podcast. I'm Jacob.
Kathleen.
Michelle.
Justin.
And today we're going to be talking about the novel The Great Gatsby, written by Scott F. Fitzgerald.
So the book is basically about a guy named Nick, who's the narrator, and he goes to his cousin's house, Daisy, and let me start that. So the book is basically about a guy named Nick. He's the narrator, and so he talks about and goes through the lives of Gatsby, Daisy, and Tom. And it's a book about love and death and
the American dream.
Yeah. So what? There's a lot of imagery in this book. What imagery stood out the most to you guys? What made you feel the most in regards to the characters?
Okay, so when they described the Valley of Ashes, which was overlooked by Dr. Eckelberg's billboard with his eyes and glasses, and that kind of just ties in to symbolism. The way the Valley of Ashes is described creates a sense of decay and emphasizes the lost and forgotten.
For the billboard with Dr. Eckelberg's glasses, what do you guys think that symbolized?
God.
Well, it only talked about it being like God when Wilson had Myrtle and he was forcing her to look at the billboard.
Yeah.
So he was saying, "Oh, God sees everything," and he was looking at Dr. Eppleford.
And I think the first scene that the billboard was in when Nick was describing it and how it was fading, I kind of thought that was God kind of turning a blind eye to all the sinners that passed through the Valley of Ashes on their way to New York.
Is there anything else for imagery and symbolism that we can talk about?
The green light.
So in the beginning of the book, when Nick isn't very well acquainted with Gatsby yet, he hasn't even met him officially, he sees this figure on the dock that he assumes is Gatsby, and he's reaching out towards this green light across the bay, and that's supposed to symbolize Daisy and his longing for her. That light comes from the East Egg, right where Daisy lives, and somewhere in the book it talks about how when Daisy and Gatsby were finally reunited, it was the enchantment quote, another object that wasn't enchanted anymore.
And then I also think that with the light across the bay, when Gatsby is thinking about it, he thinks it's Daisy. Well, he knows it's Daisy, but it represents his desires too, that are hard for him to reach because it's across the bay and in the other city, And then to get to it, Fitzgerald, I think he made it this way, that he has to go through the Valley of Ashes, through the eyes of God, through the sin, and yeah.
It's also important to note that this light thing is kind of a double entendre. Gatsby's love story in itself is a metaphor for the American dream. Hence why that light is green. That's supposed to represent the American dream. It's the money that people are always pursuing, which Gatsby also pursues, but he did that for Daisy.
Yeah. What do you guys think about Gatsby's character?
I don't like him.
Why not?
Well, I think he's more like a poor soul who's lost. And then he tries to have some sort of meaning in life by pursuing Daisy, and he's been doing that since he met her for 5 years. He's been doing that for 5 years, and by the end of that 5 years, he had this huge house, and he became rich and stuff, all for Daisy. And he even was a bootlegger. That's how he got his money too. And yeah. So he's kind of questionable character, but I don't think he's good and I don't think he's like bad because he has good intentions.
Yeah, he's like dwelling too much on the past. He's kind of stuck in that Daisy craze, or not craze, but he's like in love with her, and he can't accept that she hadn't moved on without him. And I guess he's trying to like restart, win her back, and
But
it's just not possible. Well, unless,
I think it's also important to note that even before Daisy was important in his life, he was already ashamed of his upbringing. He didn't like being a poor boy. He ran away from home as a teenager just to pursue something else because he thought he was meant for something greater. That was ingrained in him ever since he was young. And at the end of the book, when Nick and Gatsby's father, Mr. Gats, start talking, we find out that Gatsby kept the schedule about all of the things he had to accomplish throughout the day because he was just so ambitious. And when you add something like being in love with someone to that ambition and you apply that, it can turn into some terrible downfall, which happened to Gatsby here. He didn't know how to separate the two.
Okay. To add on to Gatsby's character, Nick also says, the truth was that Great Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was the son of God, a phrase which means anything, means just that, and he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty. So, what Nick is trying to say there is that Gatsby is kind of, he has a goal, one goal, and he would do anything to do it. Where he says platonic conception, I did some research before, and that basically means that anything from the past doesn't change. So that kind of ties into what he thinks of Daisy and how he thinks that their love can survive that 5 years without changing anything.
Okay, so since we've already discussed Gatsby and his lover, I think it would only be appropriate to talk about said lover, Daisy Buchanan. Daisy Buchanan. She's like just like every other character in this book. She's pretty flawed herself. She's the cousin of Nick, who is
second cousin.
doesn't matter.
She is one of Nick's cousins, one of her long-lost cousins. In the 5 years that Gatsby and Daisy weren't together, she got married to this heir of a very wealthy family at the time, the Buchanans, Tom Buchanan. In the book, we find out that she only didn't marry Gatsby at the time because he was poor. Yeah, okay.
She just seems like not that she's a gold digger, but I mean, I guess if someone was really poor, then you wouldn't want to marry him because they wouldn't even be able to support you. But she just seems like not a good person.
She was born into a wealthy family, and she doesn't really. I guess she's the kind of person who doesn't want to
step down from her status. Marry down as opposed to marry up or stay the same. Yeah.
So her social standing is more important than
her social standing and her wealth is more important to her.
And that's supported by when Tom bought her those pearls. I don't exactly remember how much they were, but in the book it implies that that's kind of one of the reasons why she said yes. That locked her in.
Because she was about to, she didn't want to go through the wedding.
Yeah, right? she received a letter from Gatsby, right?
It was a letter she kept, right?
Yeah, I thought she got the pearls, and then she was going to wear them, and then she got a letter from Gatsby.
Yeah, thinking that she wouldn't get that letter, and she did.
Yeah, and then so she didn't want the pearls anymore. That's what she was saying. She was saying oh, take it back and tell them that I don't want it anymore.
The wedding's off.
Yeah. But then by the end, she was like, okay. She put the pearls back on.
Yeah, and that's when she took the letter into like the bathtub, right, and like kind of dissolved.
Yeah.
So I felt like that like symbolized or like represented like how like her and like Gatsby, like their connection, like she kind of just like let it go away because it dissolved in the tub.
She accepted it.
Yeah.
Something that Gatsby couldn't do. Which, you know, in a way is unfair because, like, all of a sudden Gatsby waltzes into her life again and suddenly, like, her being content is now disrupted because Gatsby is just so persistent and insists on what happened 5 years ago to happen again. But that's simply not the case. Which is one of the underlying themes of this book, that you can't just reach back into the past and expect it to happen again just the way you want. Like, Gatsby goes, not Gatsby, Daisy has her own mental breakdown somewhere in the book, saying that Gatsby expects too much from her, and she simply cannot live to those expectations. Or at least that's what Nick observes.
What about Tom?
Daisy's husband?
I don't think there's much to say about him. He's kind of like Daisy.
Yeah.
He's heavily characterized in the beginning of the book, and because of Nick's bias, like, even the reader would easily dislike Tom, as he was described to have peaked at the age of 21, which is really sad. He keeps trying to live out his glory days. He talks about a book he read or something, and made some racist remarks. It was really easy to just dislike Tom right off the bat and want to root for Gatsby once we find out about the love story, but...
Speaking of dislike, can we I don't know, did we talk about Nick yet?
No.
No, okay, because I don't know why, but Nick just annoys me. He feels like he's that emo kid. Well, he's not emo, but like he just like is disgusted by everything. Like every time he's like
They're also
talks
cynical.
about anything, he's like, I just felt disgusted. And like I don't know. Like,
he comes
what's
off
his
as
deal?
high and mighty, as if he's superior to everyone, when he himself, like, he's very flawed too. That's one of my favorite things about this book. It's supposed to be written by a person it's from Nick's perspective. So, like, if it was in Gatsby's perspective, it would have been a different story altogether. And that's something that I find really cool. Like, all of these things that we're perceiving, all of these feelings, it's because of how Nick says it. We don't really know if Tom is like that. We don't know if Gatsby is really that great, or if Daisy is as lovely as she's described. He's kind of just a plot device in the story. Like, if anything, he's like a catalyst to what happens between Gatsby and Daisy. And
he just connects everyone in the story.
Yeah.
Like, so we can see what goes on both sides, on like whichever side.
He's like a window to their lives.
Yeah.
But so it's like it's through his point of view, but
Yes.
you can still see what's going on with them.
Yes.
So it's first person.
Yes, it's written in the first person. He's a writer. I don't think we've established that, but he's a writer. He's well educated, and he only moves to West Egg to run away from the gossip. Like, the gossip that hit even Daisy and the rest of the people he met up with. They thought that he was engaged to some girl, when that's exactly what he was trying to run away from, all of that, all of the rumors. And I think that brings up an important aspect of the story. Nick continually does this thing where he has commentary and always judges everything, I guess, for lack of better wording. And I feel like Nick is kind of Fitzgerald's, how do you say?
Persona?
I guess persona into how Fitzgerald feels.
Yeah. I feel like Fitzgerald like imposes like his beliefs and like what like his values into Nick. Well, I could be wrong because I don't know him.
Our interpretation. I think that's it for character analysis. I think a really important quote overall in this novel is one that Nick says. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. I think the purpose of that is for Fitzgerald to voice his disapproval of a lot of the things that was going on in the Jazz Age. Like, you know, people think of the Jazz Age, the 1920s, as such a good time with the flappers and, you know, everyone rebelling against prohibition and whatnot. But there really was moral and social decay that happened behind the scenes. Something that's heavily underlined throughout The Great Gatsby. Something that Nick repeatedly talks about having a distaste for, and seeing his cousin, her husband, even Gatsby partake in.
Okay, so another theme in The Great Gatsby is the separation of classes. So Fitzgerald really shows the separation of classes, especially with the Valley of Ashes. That's where he sort of described the lives of the lower class, because he even said that where the ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys, and he also says of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. He sort of paints us a picture of how the lower classes' lives were and how they were already falling apart and how they're pretty much close to death. And then he also really elaborates on the upper classes, where they're always having parties, and like at Gatsby's house.
It's important to note that the fact that there's such a stark contrast between these classes shows that these people up there really don't care. And just like we mentioned earlier with the billboard and Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, these people do have a neglect for morals and don't consider those who are poor, like Tom's mistress's husband, George.
Especially because he has the island right next to the Valley of Ashes, and they're just so close together, yet they're so different.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the ending.
The ending of the book?
Yeah.
Because it's just interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. What about it?
What about the ending?
Okay. Well, let's briefly summarize the ending for those who are listening and don't know. So Tom has a mistress, her name is Myrtle, whose husband is a poor mechanic. He's described as anemic, pathetic, basically a foil to Tom. Towards the end of the book, during a dispute where Daisy is trying to decide between Tom and Gatsby, they all go out for a ride in the town.
Or wasn't it to New York?
To New York. They all go for a ride to New York. They decide to switch cars. What was the reason for switching cars?
So it was a hot day at West Egg, and so Tom's car's seats were no. It was Gatsby's car's seats that were hot. So Tom decided that he'll take Gatsby's car, and then Daisy and Gatsby will ride Tom's car to New York. So that's why they switched.
Mm-hmm. And before going to New York, Tom, who was in Gatsby's car with Jordan Baker and Nick Carraway, Jordan and Nick were at the time lovers.
Mm-hmm.
Tom needed to get some gas. Again, it's important to note that they were in Gatsby's car. So Myrtle, who again is Tom's mistress, doesn't know what Daisy looks like at this point, and doesn't know that this is Gatsby's car. So Myrtle assumes that Jordan is Daisy, and that the car is Tom's. Later in the story, when they switch off cars again,
To get back from
New York, Daisy drives Gatsby's car with Gatsby in there, and their cars are switched and it's back to normal. Myrtle recognizes the car and tries to flag it down to get Tom's attention, wanting to run away from George and whatever their argument must have been. And she gets struck and killed by Daisy, but Gatsby takes the fall for it because he loves Daisy oh so much. And this whole web of lies does not end well for, well, of course, Myrtle, Gatsby, and George, as George is told by Tom. No, George is under the impression that Gatsby was the man that. George is under the impression that Myrtle cheated on him with Gatsby and not Tom. So one day, while Gatsby is sitting in his pool, just minding his own business, George breaks in and shoots him dead.
I think Gatsby knew.
Gatsby knew?
Yeah, that George was coming.
Did he?
He knew something was coming.
He knew, he that's why he never was in his pool until then. He never used his own pool until then.
It was also sad because Gatsby didn't know that Daisy hit Myrtle, possibly on purpose, because Myrtle was Tom's lover. And
And George killed himself.
George killed himself after killing Gatsby.
The Holocaust.
Which Fitzgerald describes it as a Holocaust.
Did you even thank him for taking the blame?
I'm sure she was thankful. Yeah, she knew. Nick also knew.
Did she show anything towards him, that he knew, or just she? Oh wow, he's thank you, but he didn't tell him.
I'm under the impression that she just took it and ran with it. She didn't feel entitled to him or anything because of that.
Entitled?
Yeah. She didn't. Indebted. She didn't feel indebted to him. That she owed him anything.
It also kind of adds on to the classes thing because she sort of left a mess with all the people who were in the lower class, and then she just left because she could, and she didn't have any sympathy towards them.
Yeah.
She's a leech.
Yeah. There's also this one scene at the end of the book, 2 years after Gatsby's death, where Nick sees Tom in town and he refuses to shake his hand until a bit afterwards, after they're talking. Tom explains that after Myrtle's death, he was devastated, how he had to give up the apartment that he and Myrtle stayed in. And right after that, he goes into this shop to buy really expensive things, whether it was a necklace or something like collars. I forgot what it was. But I just, it's ironic, how he made a big deal about Myrtle. And immediately after, he just turns around and just proves Nick right about his materialism and not actually caring about Myrtle. Okay.
Good.
I don't understand why. I'm gonna flag down this car, but I'm gonna go right in front of the car when it's going 40 miles per hour?
Yeah, that's pretty fast still.
Oh, it's gonna turn out fine. They're gonna break from 40 to 0 in 5 seconds or less?
Yeah, even if it was Tom, you still need stopping distance in the car, she stopped right in front, the moment the car was practically already hitting her.
Myrtle's stupid.
That is an opinion.
go in front of a moving car and expect, nothing to happen, nothing bad to happen. Expect the car to just stop.
Did she run out because she was having a fight with George? Like, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She is.
Oh.
So, okay, that's why she was
He
so
was
frantic.
locked up in their apartment.
Weak anemic boy isn't so weak anymore.